And I'm going to start with a favorite video of mine of General Wesley Clark, a former NATO commander, describing what the U.S. policy for the Middle East has been since 2001. Let's watch it together briefly.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
So for the neoconservatives, the plan was always to, at some point, get rid of Iran and to deal with the Islamic Revolution and terminate it, essentially, in order to give Israel security. But why are Iran and Israel enemies? It doesn't necessarily make sense. They're not exactly neighbors or anything. And the answer is that they weren't always enemies. Biblically speaking, Cyrus the Great was a great friend of the Jewish people. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem and to the kingdom of Judah after the Babylonian exile, and there's praise of him in the Bible. Previously, in the days of the Shah, the former ruler of Iran, who was overthrown by the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran and Israel had a pretty good relationship. Israel built a lot of Iranian infrastructure. I believe it included sewage systems, the airport in Tehran, a bunch of other infrastructure in the country. There was a robust oil trade between the two sides. There was a lot of Israeli middlemen working as intermediaries for the sale of Iranian oil. So the relationship wasn't always bad, and it's not really based on geography that there's this enmity. If you look at a map of Iran, which is always where I like to start, Iran is over here, then you've got Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and then here you have Israel. And so just from a geographic perspective, it makes some sense for Iran and Israel to be friends in order to contain the Arabs between them and to halt the threat from the Arabs. Remember, in the mid-20th century, Arab nationalism was on the rise. The Arabs of Iraq, for example, wanted to be able to take this part of Iran, Khuzestan or Ahvaz, which is majority Arab. So there is reason for them to cooperate. But this all changed with the Islamic Revolution. And in 1979, after, disturbances in 1953, where the CIA and the British and Iranian military officers helped remove an increasingly unpopular prime minister of Iran by the name of Mossadegh. In 1963, there were big protests against the Shah. These kept on escalating as a result of the Shah's policy of trying to modernize Iran too quickly, and that modernization was seen as un-Islamic. And what led to the overthrow of the Shah and this change in relationship was an alliance between the far-left communists of the Tudeh party, the Reds, and the Black Turbans, the religious groups led by, among others, Khomeini and his mentors, which culminated in the success of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in, I think it was January 1979 that the Shah decides that he's going on vacation in order to avoid the consequences of the protests. And then in February of 1979, Imam Khomeini returns. And he returns, and there is this expectation on the part of the Carter administration that Khomeini might be some kind of just figurehead rather than an absolute autocratic ruler of Iran. That turns out not to be the case. Khomeini drafts a new constitution and a new policy. In November of 1979, a bunch of students that are associated with the Islamic Republic's regime end up taking over the American embassy, and after the takeover of the American embassy, new supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, declares America as the great Satan and the Soviet Union as the lesser Satan, and Israel as the small Satan, I suppose. And this was the way in which the Islamist rulers of Iran wanted to make it clear that they were charting a new pathway that focused on Iran's Islamic identity as opposed to the secularizing and modernizing efforts of the Shah. So this is the context in which we have the Islamic Revolution. I don't want to bore you with a long historical discourse, but the idea for the new authorities in Iran under the 1979 Islamic regime was for them to be able to have a strongly Islamist identity and a strongly Islamic identity in order to make Iran into a leader of the Muslim world. This was always a bit of a tall order because, as this graphic will show you in a moment, firstly, big percentages of Muslims don't even recognize the Shia as Muslims. So big percentage of Sunni Muslims, you have here examples of, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Tunisia. Incidentally, the Palestinian territories, 40% of Palestinians don't even recognize that the Shia are Muslims. Yet Iran under Khomeini wanted to claim leadership of the entire Muslim world. So that was a little bit of a problem. The Shia, you have to remember, are a small minority of Muslims, maybe 15%, maybe 10 to 20%, something in that range. So them trying to claim the mantle of leadership of the Muslim world was always going to be a little bit of a challenge, shall we say. It wasn't really going to work very well. And yet the Iranians decided that they wanted to do this. Intellectually speaking, Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, had translated the work of a man named Sayyid Qutb. I think we'll do an episode of the Muslim Brotherhood at some point. Sayyid Qutb was a key figure in the Muslim Brotherhood who articulated the need for jihad in order to re-Islamize society. And Khomeini, having seen the secularizing influence of the Shah, wanted to do something similar. And so he was really aiming for this kind of leadership role in order to become the key power in the region that was around him, and in order to become the key power in the broader Muslim world. So this kind of ambition really played a role. So for Iran to try to lead the Muslim world when it's, a majority Shia was always going to be a tall order. In front of you here is a map of the Sunnis and Shia in the Middle East region. Blue are the Shia, red are the Sunnis. And really, this is an excellent map, firstly. But what it shows you is that Iran and southern Iraq are the only really majority Shia areas. There is a Shia population in Syria. These are the Alawites. Technically, they're heretical, and they're not included among mainstream Shia Islam. That's another conversation that I won't get into. The Alawites are an offshoot, if you will, of Shia Islam, just as the Druze in Israel and Lebanon and Syria. And in Lebanon, you see a decent chunk of Shia population. You see Shia in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. This is where the oil sits. And you have Shia in Kuwait, again, a very oil-rich country, and then some here in northern Yemen and in southern Saudi Arabia. Again, these are not exactly the right kind of Shia. These are Zaydi Shia. So the way to summarize it is that mainstream Shia Islam believes that there were 12 imams, religious leaders, who were all descended from the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, and these 12 imams are infallible. The Zaydis, the ones that you see in Yemen here, these guys stop at 5 imams, and the Ismailis, they stop at 7 imams, whereas mainstream Shia Islam continues down for all 12. So this is quickly a map of the Shia world, and it shows you why Iran has influence in Yemen, why Iran has influence in Iraq, Syria, and in Lebanon. This influence of the Iranians is primarily Shia driven, but Iran wanted to be the leader of the Muslim world, and it just couldn't do that. It couldn't make it work. Now, going to the geography of Iran, if you look at this country, it's incredibly mountainous, as I hope the map will show you. You've got this massive sort of salt desert in the middle. It's separated from Iraq by a massive mountain chain, and it has this big vulnerability in the south, in the Ahvaz area, and the oil is concentrated here. And the oil is exported from a tiny little place called Kharg Island, which you should be able to see right here. This is where the processing for export of Iranian crude actually happens, and that's where the Iranians can send their oil into the rest of the world. And the Iranian exports, as I'd mentioned, happen from this Kharg Island. This is an important point to understand because when you look at a map of the region, the ability to export oil is located in these tiny locations. The way that oil exports work is that you need a very specialized, very dedicated port to be able to do it. And each of those countries that are in the Gulf pretty much just have one of those. The Emiratis have more than that. But this is where most of the oil exporting happens. And if this kind of infrastructure is knocked out, if it's threatened by, say, Iranian missiles, that pretty much takes care of it. You can no longer export oil. So the Iranians export from Kharg Island. The Iraqis have a platform in Basra. The Kuwaitis, mostly from Ahmadi. The Saudis, you can see that from Ras Tanura and Qatar. They have Ras Laffan, and they have a terminal up north for the gas exports. These assets are highly concentrated. And understanding this very high concentration helps you understand Iran's military strategy. Because there are these critical nodes from which oil can be exported, it makes sense for the Iranians to have precision-guided ballistic missiles that can knock out this kind of infrastructure in the event of a war and cripple their enemies. Their enemies rely on American forces and on the US Air Force and on American technology, jets, etc., etc. So for the Iranians, given that they want to be the dominant player in their region, they want to be able to threaten critical assets. They can't build jets, and they often can't afford to buy an air force the size, say, of Saudi Arabia's or the UAE because they have smaller oil exports. What do you do about that? You build a lot of advanced missiles, and you try to solve the problem that way.
If you enjoyed this piece of premium content from the Lotus Eaters, head to our website where you can find more.